The Echoes, Life After Childhood Trauma, Episode 4. The Watcher and the Performer. There's a moment I keep returning to, that same playground that I spoke about before. Not the scene itself, but the feeling that lived inside it. The way that distance wrapped itself around me like a second skin. How even laughter in the air could sound like another language. I didn't know it then, but that was when the Watcher was born. The part of me that learned to stand just outside myself, keeping just a quiet vigil over everything. The others, the noise, the risk of being seen. And that part, that presence, it never really left. It followed me into classrooms, into friendships and love affairs, into stages and therapy rooms, always scanning, always translating, always deciding what was safe to show. Not the villain of my story, just the quiet survivor who refused to look away. The Watcher became my sonar. It sent out pulses into every space I entered, listening for tone, movement, breath. I could sense a shift in atmosphere before anyone else said a word. Every conversation carried a subtext that the Watcher understood long before I did. If you've ever grown up needing to read danger in micro-expressions, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's like breathing in Morse code. The words never tell the whole story, so you learn to translate body language, rhythm, silence. And that's what the Watcher does. It predicts, protects, and adjusts. It's the mechanism that made the world survivable when it wasn't safe to be spontaneous. And later in life, it even made me good at what I do. It's a strange thing how trauma sometimes gifts us the very skills that will one day heal others. When I began performing, literally performing on stage, as I was involved in the music business when I was very young, the Watcher found its perfect disguise. The same hyper-attunement that once scanned for danger started scanning for connection. I could feel a room before I could see it. Every inhale, every exhale, every murmur became part of a live map I could navigate in real time. It looked like stage presence, but underneath it was still the child on the wall, reading faces, listening for safety. That's the strange duality of surviving. What once kept you small later makes you magnetic, and people call it charisma, when really it's just finely tuned vigilance with better lighting. Then there's the performer, the one who steps in when everything else collapses. I've seen it happen in me more times than I can count. Moments when the world was falling apart, when grief or loss or betrayal made breathing difficult, and still, somehow, I found myself doing what needed to be done. The smile appears, the voice steadies, the task gets completed, and inside there might be chaos, but the performer knows how to run the show. It's the part that carries us through unbearable times, and it's absolutely brilliant at it. The cost, though, comes later, when the curtain falls and there's no applause, only the echo of having held it all together again. You know, for a long time I thought these parts were at war, the Watcher keeping me detached and the performer keeping me polished. I don't think that anymore. They're collaborators, not competitors. When the world turns unpredictable, they move in perfect unison, one scanning, one smiling, both working toward the same goal, survival. It's choreography, not conflict. And when you've grown up inside trauma, that choreography is kind of genius. You become fluent in reading rooms, in managing energy, in holding yourself together in places that have no room for collapse. And I see this pattern every day in my work. My clients sit across from me, their Watcher alive and listening, their performer making sure they appear absolutely fine. And it's a delicate dance. Every word filtered, every emotion rehearsed, just enough to seem authentic. But they're exhausted before we even begin. And I recognize it instantly because I've lived inside that performance too. Often the first task isn't to fix anything, but simply to name who's speaking. This is the watcher, I might say, or the one who checks for threat. This is the performer, the one who makes it look easy. And somewhere in between, beneath both of those voices, is the authentic self, quiet, waiting, patient. The one who's been told for decades to stay backstage. So the process really is giving that part permission to step forward, the authenticity, not to replace the others, but to be heard alongside them. It's like a negotiation, an act of trust that the world won't fall apart if the real voice takes a breath. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes a single safe moment, but when it happens, when that true voice whispers, "I'm still here," everything else softens. The watcher lowers its guard, the performer exhales, and what's left is something quieter, something that feels less like control and more like presence. I used to think these parts of me were broken, evidence of damage, proof that I wasn't whole. But now I see them as devotion. They were my system's way of loving me, of keeping me alive until I could bear to be myself again. And that's the truth of trauma most people don't talk about. It's intelligence, it's precision, it's loyalty. It doesn't just protect the body, it protects the soul. And one day, if we're lucky, we learn to thank it before we ask it to rest. If you recognize yourself in this, if you know what it is to scan a room before you speak, to perform calm while your insides are shaking, just know this isn't weakness, it's choreography. It's the proof of how well you adapted. But adaptation isn't the end of the story. At some point, the stage lights dim, the spotlight fades, and there's no one left to impress. And in that quiet, in that soft, unguarded space, you might finally realize you were never just a show. You were always the story.